Yes, Mr. Beer.
Thank you. Good afternoon, sir. Good afternoon, Ms Vennells.
Mr. Beer.
Can we pick up where we left off, which was looking at that series of sub-postmaster complaints about bugs, errors and defects, by turning to poll 00196815, please. This is from a Mr. Pennington. It's dated as having been received on the 13th of September 2013 in your office. And in the second paragraph, having said, "Dear Paula," he says, "First, though, may I explain my background? I worked conscientiously and loyally for the Post Office for over 20 years. In this time, it was very stressful due to the economic environment. However, at the same time, customer service was very satisfying." Next paragraph. "My complaint is from when the Horizon system was implemented. There was a loss from the system due to incorrect procedures on the staff side, lack of training. That resulted in a shown loss of over £18,000. I was assured that it would all return. However, only £13,500 returned. And I had to, as the expression was, quote, make good the shortfall. At the time, I took my grievance to the area manager level, only to be told that the contract stipulated all shortages must be made good, and there was no appeal procedure." Looking at that complaint, is this the kind of letter that you described before the break as one that would have been sent down the Chief Executive's office correspondence to be dealt with route?
The route, yes, it would. The route wasn't just the Chief Executive, it was for all executive correspondence, and I imagine this would have gone through that particular process.
The thing that Mr. Pennington complains about, that he was told that the contract stipulated that all shortages must be made good, was that your understanding of the contract at this time, September 2013?
Yes, it was my understanding of the contract. Once a postmaster had gone through the various stages of, and I realise now from all that we know that this was done in some cases very inadequately, but the complaint and the dispute would go through a particular process, and if it wasn't resolved, then the contract was to make good. My assumption through this time was that that resolution process worked, and clearly for many cases it didn't do that.
Where did you get the understanding from that the contract said that all losses must be made good, irrespective of cause?
My understanding, it was a fact within the organisation. So contract managers would say that, area managers, as we see here, would say that. It was known that that was the requirement of the contract.
You say it was known that it was the requirement of the contract. In fact,
Yes.
The contract didn't say that at all.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, I'm sure it didn't. In fact, I've read the contract. The contract doesn't use the words "make good," but that was the.
Nor does it say all losses.
Surprised. Sorry?
Nor does it say all losses.
No, I'm sorry. Could you ask me the question
Yes.
again? Thank
Where
you.
did you get the understanding from
Yes.
that the contract said that sub-postmasters had to make good all losses, i.e. irrespective of the cause of them?
I'm not sure that I had that understanding.
What was your understanding by September 2013 of the operation of the contract so far as sub-postmaster losses was concerned?
I'm sorry, I don't know that I could recall. I'm not sure that I can recall now what I knew the contract said at that time. I have read the contract a number of times. What I can recall from that time is colleagues saying that the Post Office could not, in all cases, determine what had happened, and so the contract held the sub-postmaster liable for losses in the office. My understanding was that that was following a detailed dispute resolution process, but I can't recall the details of that contract.
If the contract said that the sub-postmaster was responsible for all losses, what was the point of an investigation?
The point of the investigation would be to make sure that would be to find the cause of the loss, because
why was the cause of the loss relevant if the sub-postmaster had to make good all losses?
Because it would be highly irresponsible for an organisation to be, as we will come on to discuss, I'm sure, to be prosecuting and finding people guilty of things that they were not guilty of, and vice versa.
At the moment,
there's a requirement to investigate anything that is unsatisfactory, and shortfalls either way, where they're disputed, would need to go through a proper process.
At the moment, I'm not talking about prosecution at all. I'm exploring at the moment your understanding of the contract and the extent to which it permitted recovery against the sub-postmaster, and in what circumstances. Was it your understanding that it permitted recovery of all losses, irrespective of cause, from a sub-postmaster?
I honestly can't remember what it was at the time. I would have completely relied on the people whose job it was to determine what the contract did or didn't say and how it was applied.
When you were network director, were you the ultimate line manager of such people?
Yes, they reported through a general manager. There were contract managers, and they reported through three or four different levels through to me.
And you can't say now what your understanding of the operation of the contract was. Is that right?
I can't say now. What I'm saying is that I cannot recall now what I understood the wording to be in the contract, in the clause that applied to this. But I trusted that this was a process that had been in place for many years, and it was run by an experienced team. The inquiry has a witness statement from Lynn Hobbs, who was the general manager in charge of that team, and she was I knew Lynn, she reported to me, she was a very responsible and very assiduous general manager. So I had a number of different areas of responsibility, and I had to rely on the experts in those different areas. I wouldn't have trusted my own interpretation or memory of a contract in an individual case.
Thank you.
I wasn't involved in that level.
Can we move on? Poll 0010-1783, please. An email to you, we're in late 2014 now, from Tim McCormack. And if we scroll down, please. Thank you. Dear Paula, so it's directly to you. Yet again today, Mark Davis, speaking on behalf of the Post Office, relied on the defence that there are no systemic errors in Horizon, and that this is proved because we deal with so many customers per day in so many branches. Just stopping yet there, that was a frequent refrain of the Post Office at this time, wasn't it?
It was, and it was one that I used, and it was true, and it was completely unfair in these cases.
I think Mark and yourself might like to review the periodic message to branches that are sent out via Horizon. There are a catalogue of systemic errors that arise from time to time and are fixed, some involving automatic transaction corrections. Paula, as I keep saying, you're surrounded by people in your office that tell you all is well. You have no personal knowledge of operating Horizon, nor probably any in-depth technical knowledge. What if the people that are telling you all is well have the same attributes? Over the page, please. So forget systemic errors for the moment and consider intermittent errors, which by and large are caused by communication problems. I know of more than one, but one in particular. It exists. It occurs at different times in different branches. It is noticed. They're reported to the MBSC. I'd really like to see the number of times this has been reported. It causes financial loss to the sub-postmaster. They're not fixed, but the wise sub-postmaster knows how to get his money back, so you don't hear many complaints. You'd hear from the audit team if they caught someone doing it, though. So why haven't these intermittent errors been fixed? To put it simply, because they're intermittent. There's no sequence of events that can cause this error to reoccur in any particular branch. How can you fix something that you don't know what caused it in the first place? You have to throw the whole thing out and start all over again, the only way. On our chat forums, there are documented reports over the years of the same error repeating itself randomly in a wide number of branches. I'm pretty sure I can arrange for the error to be replicated, etc. What steps did you personally take in response to Mr. McCormack's email?
I can't remember in terms of this particular email, but I'm aware that there are others that I responded to Tim personally. I responded to Tim personally and then asked for issues to be followed up.
Did you, were you advised to stay away from Mr. McCormack by Mark Davis or Rob Williams?
Rod Williams in 2016.
And why was that?
I had, so first of all, I am very sorry because Tim McCormack had an insight into what I said earlier, which is the lesson of me being too trusting, I think. The comments he makes in this with hindsight ring true and are hard to see again. I had numbers of emails, but over the years, probably half a dozen. So when you add them all together, it looks to be quite a few over a period of time. I don't know that I noticed it that much, but I replied to Tim. And he has said this in his statement, his emails became more extreme in their tone to me. I understand today exactly why that's the case. And
exasperated?
Yes, yes. And I understand why that's the case.
But what did you do? Sorry.
But the tone of the emails became difficult to deal with, and I was advised that the best way of responding to this was to... so in every case, as far as I recall, we picked up the issues that Mr. McCormack raised.
And properly investigated them?
I beg your pardon?
And properly investigated them?
The one I can remember clearly was I think, around 2016, where a full investigation was put in place, and what I was told back was that we had found the explanation for the issue that he was raising. I can't remember in this particular case.
Do you know in this incident whether you caused to be reviewed the periodic message to branches or the catalogue of systemic errors that he is raising with you?
I can't remember, no.
Can we
but
move
generally,
on?
I followed things through. But clearly, if I had, not sufficiently.
Can we move on, please, to poll 0015-0178? If we just look at page 2, please, there's an email from Hayley O'Brien. I'm not going to read it out now. It's long, it's 2 pages long. I just want to see what you did with it on page 1, please. And scroll up, please, to the top. Your email to Kevin Gilliland and others, summarising what Hayley O'Brien had said. She said that there was a shortfall of £33,000 at the Griffithstown sub-post office being attributed to her. And you email Mr. Gilliland and others saying, this may be more complex than it sounds. I know Angela will look into it properly. I want to be really sure, not just on the individual case, but as much on the issues Hayley identifies in the whole process around this. I'd like you to sponsor the review of this case and see if it raises any wider issues. You need to bring in other SLT colleagues in EXCO. I'm only flagging it to Chris A at this stage in case you do uncover more than meets the eye. And then skipping a paragraph. Hopefully this is a one-off. It sounds unusual, but we've said that before, exclamation mark. Hopefully, with the emphasis on risk, Rod's team is completely up to date. And then in the last sentence of the penultimate paragraph, I know I don't need to point out the sensitivity of this as we face yet more difficult times over Sparrow. What were the more difficult times over Sparrow you were referring to there? This is December 2014.
Thank you. So we were a year into the investigation scheme. I'm not sure what I meant by more difficult times over Sparrow, but this was we were clearly dealing with sensitive issues in Sparrow, and we were looking into Sparrow being the name of the project name for the complaints mediation scheme. And what I'm flagging here is to make sure that we follow this through. It may be something that needs to be brought into the Sparrow scheme, and that I'm trying to, I imagine, keep a sense of proportionality around this. But I think it's also important to draw attention to the paragraph you didn't read out, where I asked lots of questions about it. So why didn't security get in touch? How do we monitor situations like that? How many of the branches are in this situation? Is it monitored and controlled? What is the regular review in place? So I'm doing what I've said before, is I have stepped into asking the detail, probing, and asking for something to be looked at properly. And I'm
why
also
was this sent to Mr. Gilliland?
Sorry?
Why was this sent to Mr. Gilliland?
Because he was the network director, so he was responsible for branches at the time.
Was there an established procedure for dealing with correspondence that raised complaints about Horizon?
That by this stage, there was the hub meeting which collated issues relating to Horizon, and within the organisation, Angela van den Boogaard was heading up the review, and complaints went into her. And the executive correspondence team, but this has come through me, would have picked it up as well.
So far, we've seen you reply to some direct.
Yes.
Some not seemingly pass in front of you and going to the executive correspondence team. And then some dealt with on an ad hoc basis, like this one, being sent to a collection of people.
That sounds as though they're different. They're not. Because the end person in all of this would, for instance, would have been Kevin Gilliland and Angela van den Boogaard. When you spoke to, I beg your pardon, when Mr. Blake spoke to Alistair Cameron last week, Alistair mentioned... Sorry?
That was me.
I'm so sorry. Alistair mentioned that he wasn't quite sure why things always went to Angela. They went to Angela because it was her job. And so that's why she's copied in this. Complaints and issues were raised in numbers of different places across the organisation. What was important was that in resolving them, they went back to the technical teams, and this would have gone to IT, to Kevin, around the operational procedures, and Angela.
You said this sounds unusual, but we've said that before, exclamation mark. What were you referring to there?
I don't know that it's anything more complicated than what I'm saying, which is that I presumably have raised issues previously which have been new news to me, and then found out that necessarily they wasn't. I don't think I'm making any deeper observation than that.
Was there any system in place to collect together correspondence of this kind? So far we've seen quite a few letters coming to you raising issues with Horizon, to see whether there were trends or any links between the complaints.
I don't think there was a good enough system in place. if I'm honest.
Was there any system in place?
Well, there was a system. There were two systems in place. One was the process through the executive correspondence team, which would have had a fact file, and they would have gone to, as part of that process, the expert in the organisation. So in terms of Horizon, they would have gone to, this time I think it would still have been Leslie Sewell. And the other was the hub, which was set up, I didn't realise as a result of, but as a result of the advice from Simon Clarke in 2013.
So this should have got sent to the hub,
This should have been logged at the hub, yes.
And so anything from essentially mid-July or early July onwards, 2013, should have been logged with the hub?
It should have, and it went to Angela, and she had a colleague who sat on that group.
And so if in the inquiry we've seen a series of individual responses pass through the executive team, quite often with Mark Davis's input to them, which say Horizon conducts so many transactions a day, so many transactions a week, it processes so many millions of pounds a year, there isn't a problem with the system. Would that be the right process that's been undertaken?
Mark would have only added, as he said last week, the communications overlay to that. I wouldn't have expected Mark to have got involved in the investigation of what had gone wrong. That was that was Angela's job.
Can we move on, please, to poll 0015 0182? Foot of this page, please. It's the same chain of correspondence involving the Griffithstown Sub-Post Office. And by now, Kevin Gilliland has responded to you. And you say, thanks, just watch that Angela doesn't jump to any defence, or even worse, assume she knows the answer. She did say to me that the woman's daughter had caused the problem. If we've been negligent in following through, we should think about how we manage it. It also begs the question of how the business is now being run. Why did you ask Mr. Gilliland to watch that Ms. van den Bogaard doesn't jump to a defence?
It was the right question to ask if I had a concern about it. Angela had...
Did you have a concern about it?
Angela had worked for the organisation a long time. She had very deep understanding and had come across, I think, most things. There is a danger and a risk with that, which is people become too close to something. Whether at the time I sent this email, I had been alerted to that in something else she had responded to. But my job is to call this out and to make sure that people don't get drawn into... I hesitate to use the word pattern or complacency, but that's always a risk with people who've worked in an organisation for a long time. They have a huge added benefit because of their experience and their expertise, but they don't necessarily always see things afresh.
Was it simply that she had worked for the organisation for a very long time that caused you to write this? Or was there anything more specific which led you to think that she may be, by default, a Horizon defender?
I don't believe so.
So you would administer this warning for anyone that had worked for the company for a long time, would you?
No, as I say, I can't place this in time, and there are many other things going on at the same time. Whether I had bumped up against something where Angela had been particularly defensive on something, and I mention here, she did say to me the woman's daughter had caused the problem. We shouldn't be just making assumptions. We should be looking into things in detail. But I can't remember the detail, whether there was something that prompted the comment. But I think it's a valid challenge. It would have been worse if I had said nothing.
Can we move on, please? Poll 00199 This is a letter to you from Toby Perkins MP, the member for Chesterfield, of the 16th of December 2014, about Mr. Harjinder Singh Bhutoi. You'll see in the first paragraph he says, that he's been contacted by Mr. Butoy re his conviction of theft. In the second paragraph, it says that following audit, Mr. Butoy was arrested and convicted of 10 counts of theft through false accounting totalling over £200,000. He's always denied the allegations and pleaded not guilty to all charges. He was sentenced to 3.5 years in prison. This forced him into bankruptcy and having his reputation ruined. And then Mr. Butoy asserts, like the many other sub-postmasters wrongly convicted of theft, it was errors caused by Horizon transaction processing system that created the financial discrepancies that led to his conviction. Would you have seen this as a different angle, namely a sub-postmaster's constituency MP making the suggestion on behalf of his constituent that the Horizon system was responsible for losses that had led to a man's wrongful conviction?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand the question. Would I see it as a different angle?
To the emailed and letter complaints that had come directly from sub-postmasters versus a complaint on behalf of an individual by an MP?
Not personally, I don't believe.
And so would this have been administered in the usual way through the executive correspondence team?
Yes, it would. I believe, but I can't recall now, that there was no, I think it would have been the same, actually. There was a flag process for MPs because I think the Post Office had a commitment to copy it to bring other people into the loop or something. But from a personal point of view, I wouldn't have seen this as any different.
And so this would have, would you have even seen this letter?
I don't know. It wouldn't. From memory, it wouldn't have made a difference that it was from an MP or a sub-postmaster. I worked very long days, and very often my days were back-to-back meetings. Sometimes I would see letters as they came in. Sometimes I would see something on my PA's desk, and I would ask to look at it. Other times I wouldn't get them until they'd come back from the executive correspondence team. It would really depend on the day in the diary.
Was there a way of keeping you informed, essentially, of the temperature of the business in relation to this issue? I.e., how many complaints from sub-postmasters you were getting about Horizon? Or did it depend on you spotting something on the edge of a desk?
No, there wasn't. This could have been done much better. There wasn't a regular report on it. But as you're showing, this was over such a long period of time that the challenge is the organisation didn't keep, I think, a good enough record on this type of matter. They were dealt with, they were followed through, I believe, very, very thoroughly, and they were looked at by the experts in the business. Fujitsu were involved where they needed to be. I did not have a regular report on the numbers of these coming through, but there may not have been, in the context of the timescale that this spans and the numbers coming through, it may not have seemed to people that there were that many. When you put them together like this, it clearly paints a very different picture, and one that we should have been looking at, which I think goes back to my earlier point about the institution versus the individual and how you get the right type of data reporting.
Can we move forwards, please, to 2015, poll 00102381. Page 2 at the foot, please. An email from you, if we scroll down a bit further, to Angela Vanden Bogard, Harry Clark, Rod Ismay, and others. In March 2015, it's about a complaint raised by the sub-postmaster at the Ashton-on-Trent sub-post office about scratch cards. You say, I'd really appreciate your help. This complaint simply shouldn't have reached me. It's my understanding that the MBSC and Chesterfield are supposed to be on the alert for any calls that relate to missing money, and especially any that relate to the sparrow themes, of which this is clearly one, and ensure they are dealt with, i.e. I understood there was an urgent escalation process in place so that we avoided any unnecessary additional noise or reference to Horizon, as all the investigations have so far shown problems to be mostly branch operational issues rather than the system. What was the basis of your understanding that there was an urgent escalation process in place at the MBSC and or Chesterfield?
That this was part of the branch support programme that became the business improvement programme, and there were some changes that had been put in place, I understood, in the MBSC to look at or to deal with some of the issues which Second Sight had raised in terms of training and support to sub-postmasters. One I can remember was the number of times as a sub-postmaster would call through to the MBSC, that was logged and flagged, and the MBSC, and there was a separate team in place who would then contact sub-postmasters proactively to see whether they could help and find out. So this was falling out of the work that was done on Horizon. And that I think is what I was flagging here. I'm not very happy with my wording about avoiding any unnecessary additional noise or references to Horizon.
You're not the only person that said that they don't like their use of the word noise. Is that how, in fact, it was seen at the top end of the post office? When sub-postmasters complain, it's just noise.
No, and I'm sorry, it's not a good word, but you've also seen how I've responded personally to individual matters too. No, it's a word I regret using.
But why was it used? Does it in fact reflect the workings of the minds of those at the top end of the post office, that sub-postmaster complaints about Horizon are in fact just noise?
I think it reflects a wrong understanding, yes, that people believed that Horizon worked, and this is me deploying a word that was unwise. It did not in any way mean that I personally didn't take issues seriously when they got to me. I regret this here, but there was an understanding that the system worked. And the word just shouldn't have been used by me and other people.
Can we turn forwards, please, to poll 0035 5692. And look at the bottom of page 1, please. The MP for Ashfield, Gloria Di Piero, sent you an email of the 28th of August 2015 saying, I've been contacted by the above constituent, that's William Banville in Eastwood, Nottinghamshire. And if we go over the page, please, you'll see that the MP attached this text here. And you'll, if you just scan the first couple of paragraphs, or the first 5 or 6 lines,
Mm-hmm.
and then about 10 lines in, it says the entire losses had to be made good, which they were. My initial questions are, 1, 2007 to 12, the Post Office management knew of many offices in a similar position. So was this a pre-arranged standard riposte from the ASM, as most sub-postmasters were told this? Was this to isolate us? And you'll see that's a reference to, I think, the 6th line, quote, he was told, we were the only office in the country experiencing such problems. So he's asking, or his MP's asking the question, was there a line deployed that you are the only office in the country experiencing such problems? Was that a standardised riposte? Was this to isolate us? Do you know whether any investigation was carried out as to whether that was true or not, that a standard line was deployed by the Post Office?
I don't know that any investigation was carried out. I had never heard it as a standard line. Ever. I can't imagine why. Well, I can imagine, but I didn't come across it. When a colleague in a call centre may have said that, when they're dealing with hundreds of complaints, it is possible that it seemed to them that it was the only one, but I have no recollection or understanding or appreciation that it was a company line at all.
I think here the complaint isn't about the call centre, it's to the area sales manager, the ASM.
Yes, you're right.
Saying you're the only office in the country
Yes.
experiencing such problems.
Yes.
Was there a strategy, to your knowledge, deployed to divide and conquer sub-postmasters in this way? To say you're the only person who's got this problem, pay up, it's in your contract?
No. No, I never came across that at all.
Can we move on, please, to later in 2015, poll 00117614. This is Mr. McCormack again. If we start at page 3, please. "14th of October, Mr. McCormack, to you. Subject, it had to happen sooner or later. This may be the last you hear from me directly. It's a last chance for you to accept what I've been telling you these last few years is true. I now have a clear and unquestionable evidence of an intermittent bug in Horizon that can and does cause thousands of pounds of losses to sub-postmasters." And so it goes on, and he explains in the balance of his email what the problem is. And then if we go over the page, sorry, I should have dealt with the bottom of page 1. Sorry, the bottom of page 3. I have 3 options. A, this email's the first option: appeal to your sense of decency and compassion, to accept that many of the claimants in the JFA are honest and decent citizens whose lives were destroyed by your organisation. B, go to press and see what happens, or over the page. C, await the inevitable judicial review where you will be personally exposed and perhaps leave yourself open to criminal charges. We can stop this fast now. You can wake up and realise that the people you rely on to tell you the truth about what's happening don't have the ability to do so. And what did you do as a result of this?
I don't recall. Genuinely, I don't recall what if you have further emails, I'm happy to be taken to them.
I mean, this is quite a direct form of communication, isn't it?
Yes, it is, yeah.
Would you take from that that this is a person to be put to one side
No,
and ignored, or would you think the way he's expressed himself means that I should take what he is saying seriously?
You will find an email from me, I don't know if it's in response to this, where I say to my team, we must take Mr. McCormack professionally and, I can't remember the other word I used, no matter how rude people were, and sometimes it felt like that, because he would say other things than are necessarily here. First of all, in hindsight, I think he was right. And I regret that the matters he was raising took too long to address. But I would always respond to people courteously. And I don't know genuinely what happened to this email, whether it was picked up by the team, whether I sent it on to somebody, but I would never ignore something.
So if we look at the foot of page 2, we can see that Miss O'Farrell, who I think was your PA
Yes.
or executive assistant, sends that email on to Angela van den Boogaard, the executive correspondence team, and the flag case advisor. What was the flag case advisor?
That, I think, was what I was trying to remember earlier, is that there were, I think, an accelerated process around the executive communications team for flag cases. So, and MPs would have gone into that, I believe.
And then if we go to page 1, please. At foot of the page. This gets forwarded on to Roderick Williams by Angela van den Boogaard, and he says, "Thanks, Angela. I agree we should ask for the information, but recommend we write to him in the same terms we have every other person who says they have evidence of flaws, i.e. Kay Linnell, Second Sight, Nick Wallace, Sandeep Patel, Professor Button. I have sent those letters and happy to do so again." Was there a standard text letter that went back to people that raised complaints?
Well, it sounds as though there was. I wasn't aware what Roderick Williams had.
I'm also pretty sure I know about the JR he's referring to. I've already sent a holding letter to that former sub-postmaster acknowledging receipt of his complaint. If you agree, I'll circulate something shortly. I want to send it in hard copy rather than an email, with Aveen sending a short email saying a response is in the mail. Generally, my view is that the guy's a bluffer who keeps expecting us to march to his tune. I don't think we should do so, but instead respond with a straight bat. Was it your view that Mr. McCormack was a bluffer?
No, as I say, when I responded to Mr. McCormack, I took his challenges seriously, and I can remember one particular case where Angela went to meet I think it was the Core and Outreach branch that he had raised a query on.
I mean, in his email, he said, you, Chief Executive, are not getting the right advice from the people you've surrounded yourself with. This email gets forwarded to the people that you've surrounded yourself with. Can you see a problem?
I can, yes.
Can we move on, please? Sorry, I should have said top of page 1. Mark Davis, the PR guy, says wise advice, with which I agree. Can we move forwards, please, to poll 0011, sorry, poll 402749. And look at page 2, please, at the top. This is mid-2016 from Mr. McCormack directly to you. He says, a typical head-in-the-sand reply from the team you've placed too much trust in. Let me be very clear. Once the police investigation is completed, it's highly likely, indeed probable, that members of your staff will be sent to prison. A custodial sentence is mandatory for this offence. Your role in this will not escape attention. This is Seema Misra's phone number. Call her and apologise and ensure her suffering is ended as soon as possible. I do wonder what kind of God you worship. What happened as a result of this being sent to you?
I believe this is the one I referred to earlier, where I forwarded, I think, to Tom Weschler and asked him to suspend any preconceptions he may have as a result of some of the Sparrow work that had been done, meaning, although we have said we haven't found any issues, that we should look again. And I can't remember what happened, but I'm reasonably sure that Mrs. Misra's case by this stage had gone to the CCRC.
Can we look, please, at page 1? And scroll down. Thank you. follow-up email from Mr. McCormack. What I've heard today is frankly totally unbelievable. By now, you should have acquainted yourself with the Dow-Mellington error and its consequences. You should know that Fujitsu said they were going to fix this earlier this year. You should know I stated it would be highly unlikely they managed to do this, as they didn't know what caused the error in the first place. You know, because I'm about to tell you, that the same error has just reoccurred in another branch in far more serious circumstances. If you want details on this, I'll be glad to help just as soon as you call Seema Misra and put her out of her misery. You're a complete bunch of idiots playing havoc with the lives of people you have little interest in. Did you, after this time, refuse to engage with Mr. McCormack?
I don't believe so, but I think by this stage, I can't remember. I think Rod Williams had taken on the responses, which I'm very sorry about, on behalf of Post Office, but honestly, I can't remember. This may have been the one where Angela went to look into the details of the bug.
That can come down, thank you. Taking a step back, would you accept that you routinely receive correspondence from sub-postmasters and people speaking on behalf of sub-postmasters, raising complaints or concerns regarding the operation of Horizon at their branch?
Yes, I would.
Did you see a pattern between them?
I saw the theme of Horizon coming up, yes.
Was anything done by you to join the dots between them?
The dots, I believed, were being joined through the investigation work in the complaint and mediation scheme. And in every case, I believed we had looked at it in some detail. And I regret today that clearly neither of those exposed the issues that we came to find out about through the common issues, the Horizon issues judgment.
Thank you. Can I turn to my next topic, which is your knowledge of the facility for remote access? You described, there's no need to turn them up in your witness statement. It's paragraphs 1,262 to 1,307, the state of your knowledge across time from 2007 onwards as to remote access, however defined. And you refer to documents provided to you by the inquiry which show that the Post Office knew that a form of remote access was possible from at least October 2008. I want to explore some of that material so far as it came to your attention. Can we start, please, with the Ernst & Young audit and the APSUP issue of 2011? Can we look, please, at WITN 0074 0126? If we look at the foot of the page, please. There's an email from Donald Bryden in September 2011. Can you remind the inquiry the function that Mr. Bryden performed at that time?
At this time, he was the group chairman of Royal Mail, which included Post Office.
Yeah, so he was chair RMG, would that be right? And if you read, he says, I was a bit surprised to see the article in Private Eye this week about a class action by sub-postmasters. It may be a bit after the horse has bolted, but it may be appropriate to have an explicit litigation/legal report in the Post Office board papers for the future. Obviously, Alice's call. She, amongst others, is copied into this email. The article raises some questions about Horizon. I suspect the Audit and Risk Committee ought to take an interest. Have we ever had an independent audit of Horizon? Now, if we scroll up, please. You say in reply, you remember this has reared its head before. I'll get a brief circulated for new board members. In summary, each time any cases have gone to court, the Post Office's position has been upheld. And from memory, in at least 2 cases, fraud was proven with subsequent imprisonment. Just stopping there, this is obviously before the January 2012 board meeting, where we saw earlier on page 6 of the minutes, Susan Crichton had said that, or words to similar effect. Where were you getting your information at this time that each time a case has gone to court, the Post Office's position has been upheld?
I can only imagine it would have still been Susan Crichton, because she was the either head of legal, or I think she was at this time head of legal. It may have been Claire Wardle, I'm not sure. But it isn't something that I would have known without either having heard it or spoken to someone who headed up legal for the Post Office.
I'm not sure I caught the surname of the other person.
Claire Wardle.
Wardle, yeah.
And was this kind of thing said in conversation? We always win, or we have always won?
No. It's obviously a fact that I had either in my head because it had been discussed, presumably in a meeting somewhere, or I had gone to somebody. I'm just looking at the time when yes, it's possible I spoke to somebody before I replied. I don't know.
There are a series of statements or facts or pieces of folklore that seem to have circulated within the Post Office, including every time we go to court, we've won. Horizon has no faults in it. Every time it's been investigated, no faults have been found. The contract with sub-postmasters said they're responsible for all losses. No remote access is possible for either the Post Office or Fujitsu. Each of which things turn out to be false. How is it that on all of these critical issues, so many false statements were circulating within the Post Office?
At the time, they were not considered to be false statements. And the source of those statements were, it's unfair to say because I can't recall clearly, but on something like this, the only possible source of this statement would have been through the Post Office legal team. So the answer for all of them would be to look for where the expertise sat within the organisation as to the genesis of what we now know are false statements.
Would you agree that it's a serious issue on those 4 points that I've mentioned, what the contract said, whether we win in court every time, whether Fujitsu has remote access, and whether investigations into Horizon have turned up faults?
Yes, very
It's a
serious.
serious issue if folklore develops, which in fact has no foundation in fact.
I agree.
Does it say something about the culture of the organisation if such folklore developed and was perpetuated and nobody checks the real facts?
That's a difficult question to answer because in hindsight it is completely valid. At the time, certainly where I was concerned, I believed that I was getting information from the people who were employed to give me the best advice because of their expertise. I didn't believe that any of those statements were folklore at all.
You say in the last paragraph, however, to avoid future doubt, the Post Office took a decision several months ago to have Horizon and the newer Horizon Online independently verified by an external systems auditor. This is currently in process and we should have the results at the end of next month. is that a reference to work recommended by Ernst & Young in their 2011 audit letter?
I cannot remember at the moment when I've seen this in the bundle, and I can't remember what it's a reference to.
That can come down. In your witness statement, it's paragraph 1276 at page...
Excuse me,
yes.
I did see there is another document in the bundle which refers to a piece of... I go back to Mike Young and Leslie Sewell and ask why a particular piece of work is late. And I think I mentioned KPMG. I don't know whether this referred to that or to a piece of work by Ernst & Young.
Can we look at your witness statement? Page 546, paragraph 1276. You say, Ernst & Young's management letter for the 2011 audit stated that they had reviewed privileged access to IT functions and that there were inappropriate system privileges assigned to the AppSup role and system_manager role at the Oracle database level on the branch database server supporting Horizon Online. The risk identified by Ernst & Young was that unrestricted access to privileged IT functions increased the risk of unauthorized or inappropriate access, which could lead to the processing of unauthorized or erroneous transactions. And then you go forward to look at the 2012 audit. Do you accept that what you were told in the 2011 Ernst & Young audit was that Fujitsu had an ability remotely to access and make changes to the Horizon Online live estate?
I don't believe that I took it, that I understood that degree of detail. What I did here in my witness statement was to look at the EY document because I couldn't remember it from the time. At the time, I had been promoted to managing director just a few months previously, and this was the first time I had come across an IT audit, and I think this is the time that I asked for a briefing document to explain to me the issues that were being raised in the audit. I accept fully that this is what the document said. How much of that I really understood at the time, I'm not sure. What I did do was to make sure that Mike Young and Leslie Sewell picked up the issues that were identified, and I think in my statement I'm going to talk about that.
The risk identified by Ernst & Young was that unrestricted access to privileged IT functions increased the risk of unauthorized or inappropriate access, which could lead to the processing of unauthorized or erroneous transactions. It's implicit in that a form of remote access by Fujitsu is possible, isn't it?
Reading that today with everything we know, yes, absolutely. I am not sure at the time that I would have understood that.
At the very least, and you accept that you read this Ernst & Young letter, you were aware that unauthorized or erroneous transactions could be processed on Horizon that weren't carried out or approved by the sub-postmaster.
I don't want to challenge because I don't want to be seen to be being defensive in any way about this. This was my first audit that I was involved in, of any kind, actually, of an IT system, and I fully accept what the document said. At the time, the focus was on the fact that the audit was late and it had run dramatically over budget. And the CIO, Mike Young, was very frustrated about the challenge he had from the board because of those things, because it had happened during the year that he had just completed the rollout of Horizon Online. I'm fairly sure that, or it says this, I absolutely wouldn't challenge that at all, that I didn't pick this up at the time as something that I was unduly concerned about. It talks about a risk and the role of businesses to manage risk. I asked for a briefing document to help me understand the nature of the technicalities, but I accept the proposition that you're putting to me.
i.e. that there was a facility for unauthorised access and therefore the facility to carry out unauthorised or erroneous transactions.
Yes, that's what it says.
Yes, it can't be read in any other way.
No, that's right.
You
And
tell
just
us.
just so that I understand, is the gloss you were putting on it, can I summarise it in this way? Anyone with the relevant knowledge and or expertise in Post Office reading that Ernst & Young report would have understood it as Mr. Beer describes?
Yes,
You are introducing, from your personal point of view, in effect, a caveat as to whether you understood it in that way at that time.
Yes, thank you. I wasn't meaning to put a gloss on it.
But that's it, isn't it?
It's a regret that I didn't understand
all
it at the time. Yes.
Okay, so that's what I'm going to call Remote Access 1, the Ernst & Young management letter. Can we turn to Deloitte, Project Zebra in 2014? Can we turn to paragraph 883 of your witness statement, which is on page 395? You refer us there to a board briefing prepared by Deloitte in draft. Yes?
Yes.
And just by way of background, and if I can summarise what's happened before, Deloitte's 2014 report was the product of a request by the board to determine if Horizon was robust, fit for purpose, and operated in an appropriate control framework. Agreed? That's the genesis of the Deloitte 2014 report.
Yes, it was a desktop exercise to look at existing documentation and assurance material.
It was therefore an important piece of work because the board wanted to know whether Horizon was robust, fit for purpose, and operated within an appropriate control framework.
Yes.
Thank you. And in addition to its main...
I'm sorry, but I should be clear. It wasn't a fresh piece of work. It wasn't asking Deloitte to give their view on those matters. It was asking Deloitte to review existing documentation. So, for example, the Ernst & Young audit material, 2 or 3 other independent audits that were done for regulatory requirements, plus internal documentation.
Yes, we'll come to see the complaints, essentially, that Deloitte made about the limitations of the exercise that they were asked to perform in a moment. But in addition to its main report, Deloitte were asked to draft a board briefing, weren't they?
Yes.
And you accept in this paragraph here, 883, that you read the draft board briefing of the 4th of June 2014.
Yes.
And then in paragraph 884, you say, my first impression was that this was a critical report which raised serious concerns. Yes?
Yes.
I needed to understand whether the caveats, that's the caveats in their report, could be addressed. If they couldn't, it could have serious implications with whether we continue to use the system. That's the Horizon system.
That's right.
Whilst I recognise the limitations in this thinking now, I certainly felt at the time that I had some contextual reassurance that the system was working simply from the enormous number of successful transactions which were completed each day. However, it was clear we needed to understand the gaps and caveats over the page and whether they could be addressed. And then you say there were also parts of the report that I did not understand. For example, I don't think I understood the reference to the exceptional balancing transaction incident in 2010. And then in paragraph 885, you say, I spoke to Leslie Sewell, and just what follows here, this is one of those things that isn't documented, is that right? This is from your recollection?
Yes, that's right.
10 years on?
Yeah.
My recollection is she assured me that the Post Office had more background documents which hadn't been taken into account, which provided assurance with respect to the caveats. On the balancing transaction incident, I was told that it was an emergency measure, it had only been used once, it wasn't about remote access, and that the Post Office had documents showing that the sub-postmaster was aware of the incident. I trusted what I was told, and on the basis of that reassurance, felt able to put that issue aside. Given that you'd received a board briefing, which you say was so serious that it caused you to think whether you could continue to use Horizon, you then say, but I was told this by Leslie. Was this not documented in any way?
I'm sorry, was what not documented?
What we see in paragraph
about?
885.
What is really curious about this is I recall that I seem to be I can recall being concerned about this report. It was a very difficult report to read. It was full of caveats, and you had to work quite hard to find what conclusions there were within it. I'm not an IT expert.
Sorry, I'm not asking you about the main report. I'm asking you only about the short 10-page board briefing.
Yes. No, this wasn't about the main report. This was about the board. The main report, I think I looked at after I saw the board briefing, and that was 70-odd pages, something incredibly, much more technical than this. But my recollection is that I was concerned about this, and others seemed to be less concerned. There was reassurance taken that if you could find your way through the paragraphs in this report, it said, or perhaps it was in a covering email, that Deloitte had not found anything to show that the Horizon system was not working as it should, but it flagged 2 or 3 issues that needed to be looked at. And the balancing transaction was one that I picked up, and I spoke to Leslie Sewell about. And the reason I remember this clearly is because I had to go back to her twice. I spoke to her twice about it. To your question, and I can talk to you about that if that's helpful, but to your question about why there was nothing documented on this, there isn't, and I find it puzzling because it was discussed at a board meeting very briefly, and I can remember that the board essentially were disappointed that this report could not be used in the way that they had hoped it would, which was alongside the Linklaters report. And so the business was asked to pick up the details that were in this and to progress it, which became the project, some of it became the project's action report. But I'm not sure that I would have documented my conversation with Leslie Sewell, because by the time I'd spoken to her twice on the balancing transaction, I came away quite reassured as to what it was.
This is one of the incidents that I referred to earlier as exculpatory evidence for you, i.e. you receive something in writing that's very serious and warrants attention. You say you spoke to somebody that reassured and calmed you, but there's no record of it.
No, because I'm not sure why I would have put the record of a conversation. The reason, to your challenge earlier about me only remembering elements that might assist what I might like to say, the reason I can recall this is because I had to go back twice, and the first time Leslie explained it to me, which was that it was similar to a transaction correction. I understood transaction corrections were about remote access, but they had to be accepted by the branch. This one was, I didn't understand the technicality of how it happened, but it was a similar process. But for whatever reason, this single incident, permission was still sought from the sub-postmaster because for whatever reason it didn't happen through the normal process of automatic acknowledgement in branch. I took that information, I went away, and then I thought, I actually want to know that what she has said is right. So I went back to Leslie and I asked her to check that this documentation was right, that we had got it documented, and the inquiry has that document in its disclosure, which shows that the sub-postmaster had approved it, and this was what had happened. And that it's because I had to go back twice that I have that quite clear recall in this example.
We'll look at the board briefing itself after the break, so I wonder whether we could break until 22. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. We were dealing, Ms. Vennells, with the Deloitte board briefing of June 2014.
Yes.
Can we look at it, please? Poll 0003 0159. You'll see it's a board briefing in draft dated the 4th of June 2014 with the title document further to our report, Horizon Desktop Review of Assurance Sources and Key Control Features, dated the 23rd of May 2014, responding to 5 specific matters identified by the Post Office as critical to the Post Office's legal position. And then look at page 2, please. Sorry, page 3. Summary, if we just look at that paragraph at the top, please. Blow that up. First paragraph. The work we carried out to support our full report, and thus this briefing document, did not constitute an audit or assurance engagement in accordance with UK or international standards. In order to deliver a formal assurance opinion, we would need to have carried out testing to address the scope limitations. Our conclusions and findings are therefore limited to the design of Horizon. They're therefore also subject to the accuracy of the assumptions and limitations set out in section 3. If we go to the foot of the page, limitations and assumptions, our findings and conclusions are presented in the context of the following limitations. 1, as a desktop exercise, we've not validated whether Horizon has been implemented or operated as described in the documentation reviewed. That's quite a significant limitation, isn't it? Would you agree?
Yes.
We're just looking at pieces of paper about how the system was designed. We haven't actually looked at whether it does the things that the pieces of paper says it does.
The issue that was faced from memory was that the software, forgive me because I'm not a technical expert, but my recollection is the software was essentially the same. And as the inquiry has heard from the very beginning of the implementation, and I think this was Mrs. Cipriani's evidence, that fix upon fix had been applied and documentation had not been kept. And so what Deloitte discovered, and this had also been discussed at the board prior to this being commissioned, that it was going to be difficult to find all of the documentation that could have confirmed this. So there was always an outstanding question as to whether one could go back and to validate the implementation of Horizon back in the 1990s, early 2000s.
They didn't, for example, look at pinnacles, peaks or kells.
I don't believe they did, and they were not words that I had, I think, ever come across. I believe that the word kell may have been mentioned once in an email right towards the end of my time at the Post Office, but they were not words that I had understood. I am sure that there are people who were involved in this piece of work and who were talking to Deloitte who did, but I wouldn't have been able to point them to those individuals because I didn't know.
Second limitation or assumption, our work was limited by significant gaps in the information available relating to both the granularity of information and the existence of the Horizon features over the entire timeline of the operation of Horizon, the effect of which is that there are gaps within what we're able to comment upon over this timeline. Our findings below are written in the context of the information available, which relates to the current system. An event occurred in 2010 which required the use of the exceptional balancing transaction process in Horizon to correct a sub-postmaster's position from a technical issue. Information has not been provided on the circumstances that led to this system issue and how the issue was identified. It's assumed that verbal assertions received from Fujitsu that this was the only time this process had been used hold true.
If I may, that was one of the comments when I spoke to Leslie Sewell that she challenged back when she said that there was more information available, and there was on that.
So again, what you're telling us is that there's a conversation, unrecorded, outside of the written document formally produced by Deloitte, raising this as a concern, which reassured you.
Yes, what I'm telling you is that in my statement I mentioned that when I spoke to Leslie, she was frustrated because she knew that there was more documentation and that would explain some of these things, and this happened to be one of those.
Fourth, we've not had any direct contact with third parties other than named contacts you provided to us. Fifth, we've not validated or commented on the quality of the documentation supplied to us. The line in the third bullet point, last line, it's assumed that verbal assertions received from Fujitsu, this was the only time this process has been used, hold true. It's not much reassurance, is it?
It isn't at this stage, and that's precisely one of the points that Leslie was making and that I saw and that the inquiry has in its documents, that there was documented evidence about this particular once-off use of a balancing transaction, and I understand that the Project Bramble work, which I was not involved in and did not see, also validated that up to a certain date as well, that was the case.
It refers in that fourth bullet point to the balancing transaction process being used to correct a sub-postmaster's position. Did you understand this to be a single sub-postmaster?
Yes.
Just one?
Apostrophe S, yes.
Yeah. And then if we go forward, please, to page 4. They say our work was also based on the following, page 5. You say, or it says, these areas were reviewed in the context of 5 matters. They're the 5 specific issues, I think, raised by the Post Office as relevant to its legal position. They say, noting the limitations and assumptions, our overall findings are, and then it's 5 that I'm interested in. Matter 5, Horizon provides visibility to sub-postmasters of all centrally generated transactions processed to their branch ledgers. That statement in quotation marks, that's what the Post Office wished to be assured about. Is that right?
I believe that's correct, yes.
And then the answer comes back. From the documentation we've reviewed, it appears that Horizon is designed such that the sub-postmaster has visibility of all centrally generated transactions to their branch ledgers in that accounting period. So that's reassuring, isn't it?
Yes.
Central transactions require sub-postmaster approval to be processed. That's reassuring as well, isn't it?
Yes.
And then this, except for balancing transaction postings. That's saying, isn't it, that for balancing transaction process postings, sub-postmaster approval is not required?
That's what it says, and that was the conversation with Leslie, and which Deloitte confirmed at this stage and later that there was one example where a balancing transaction had taken place, but that it was incorrect, what is written here, because a balancing transaction could not take place without a sub-postmaster approval. It had only, the protocol was such that the sub-postmaster had to approve it, and that was what I went back to double test, to check that that was
Why
the
did you
case.
go back to it? Why are you so concerned about it? Why this amongst all of the pages?
There were a couple of other things too in the report, so risk registers and ability to edit and delete transactions. But this was important. I think, I can't remember how the conversation with Leslie started, whether she raised this with me or I raised it with her, but the fact I had the conversation twice was clearly something that was significant. And
Why were you focusing on remote access, which is what this is about?
because I think, this is 2014, there had been in 2013, and I understand ongoing, but I didn't know at the time, the challenge raised by Mr. Rudkin via Second Sight about remote access.
So you're saying, I mean, the only thing that you mentioned in your witness statement that you checked with Leslie was about these paragraphs,
Yes,
essentially,
yes,
which are concerned with the facility for remote access by Fujitsu.
yes,
You're saying that you checked those things with Leslie in this undocumented conversation because of something that had happened the year before, i.e. Mr.
No,
Rudkin's allegations.
No, you asked me why I was talking about remote access.
Yes.
And the only, I can think the only, so remote access was raised by Mr. Rudkin in relation to the basement at Bracknell, and it was also a challenge in the cases that were going through Project Sparrow. So it wasn't, remote access wasn't a new news item, it was a very, very important item. So to focus on that would have been a sensible thing to do.
You know that this issue that we're addressing now is directly relevant to evidence that you were subsequently to give to Parliament.
Yes, I do now, and I'm sure we'll come on to that. But as I say in my witness statement, I don't know that once it had been explained to me, I accepted the explanation and moved on. And the explanation I was given remained valid, actually, for a number of years. What I didn't understand at this stage, and I don't think I understood until after I left the organisation, was that the balancing transaction tool could be used partially without permission of sub-postmasters to make interventions in the system. And I may have not understood this properly, but to, for instance, reboot a stock unit if it had crashed. I don't think I ever understood that they could be used in terms of remote access in the way I think they were, but I didn't know that at the time, I think until I left the organisation.
Would you agree that on its face this board briefing from Deloitte clearly states that Fujitsu could inject or insert or make balancing transactions into a branch account, a sub-postmaster's branch account, without the approval of the sub-postmaster? Hence, except for balancing transaction postings.
Yes, that's exactly what it says.
Yes.
That
Never mind
wasn't
about
the-
whether it was exceptional, never mind about how often it had been used, never mind whether there was some assurance that the sub-postmaster in fact knew about it. Just on the basic fact, this is written evidence to you and the board that Fujitsu could alter branch transactions without the approval of the sub-postmaster.
I accept what you're saying. I think there's an important distinction between what you're saying and what I know now to the way and I can't speak for the board, understood it at the time. And I think that's an important distinction.
And the distinction arises because of the conversation that you have with Leslie Saul, conversations you have with Leslie Saul.
Yes, and there are also documents which I think refer to that when I do go to the Select Committee in 2015 as well.
Quite aside from all of that, you agree that on the face of the board briefing, you had no information at all on which to conclude whether and to what extent Fujitsu had used balancing transactions before 2008.
That's correct.
The board wanted to know that, didn't it? It wanted to know the position from the inception of Horizon.
It did, and it had a conversation. Leslie came to the board, and I recall approximately the conversation where she explained what I stated previously, actually, that it would be very difficult, if not impossible, to get the data to look at some of the questions, for instance, about this, because it didn't exist, either because it had been destroyed because of data retention policies, but more likely because it simply wasn't there any longer.
And do you know what I'm so sorry. Do you know what investigation was carried out to find that documentation? Because we've got it. We've got the documentation which shows, one witness described it as the Wild West, the extent to which Fujitsu could inject, amend transactions pre-2010, completely before 2004, unregulated, unaudited and unauditable. And we've got those documents that show that.
Yes, and the Post Office, I should have seen those documents. I didn't know they existed. I don't know whether my CIO at the time knew they existed, but she was very clear in her communication to the board that it would be very difficult. And I can recall the chairman asking the question and how much it might cost us to get that data, well, it wouldn't be extracted, but to recreate that data. And it may even be in one of the minutes, a six-figure sum was talked about to be able to do that, which in hindsight would have been an incredibly wise investment to make.
So it wasn't
but actually it didn't need to be made, did it? Because, as you say, the information was there.
So it wasn't that the documentation wasn't available, it was that it would be costly to find it.
No, it would be costly to recreate it.
Recreate in what sense?
What was explained was that the documentation was not there in terms of whether the system... It was the point that Mr. Cipriani was making in his evidence statement, which is that when the system went in, there were multiple faults and fixes were applied, and documentation, which I understand is a frequent issue with systems, documentation was not updated as each fix was applied. And so it was very difficult. It would be difficult to know how well the system had been implemented.
I'm talking about a different thing, Ms. Vennells. I'm talking about documents from Fujitsu, some of which were passed over to the Post Office, saying we have got a team of people, team support level 3, that have privileged user rights that are unauditable and unaudited, that allow them access to the live estate to insert or amend transactions.
Yes, and that information wasn't shared, deeply regrettably.
Can we go on, please, to your evidence before the Select Committee? At paragraphs 1,000 to 1,307, sorry, that document can come down, you refer to your evidence before the Select Committee, including an email that you sent to Mark Davis and Leslie Saul on the 30th of January 2015, requesting help in preparing for the committee hearing. And can we look at that now, please? It's poll 3029812. Can we look at page 5, please? Foot of the page. And so just in context, the committee hearing was on the 3rd of February 2015, and we're now on the 30th of January 2015. To Mark Davis and Leslie Sewell, urgent, accessing Horizon. I think this is the first email in the chain. Dear both, your help, please, in answers and in phrasing those answers in preparation for the Select Committee. 1. Is it possible to access the system remotely? We are told it is. And so what you're doing there is you're attributing to the committee a statement or a challenge or a question. Is that right?
That's right. Yes, I'm positing a question.
Imagining that which they may ask you.
Yep.
And then asking for assistance with the answer.
Yes.
And you say, what is the true answer? I hope it is that we know this is not possible and that we are able to explain why that is. I need to say, no, it is not possible, and that we're sure of this because of XXX, and that we know this because we've had the system assured. Can you see that?
Yes, I can.
And then I should also read the balance of this because some of it's relevant to the question that you asked there. 2, you said this is such a vital system to the Post Office. What testing do you do, and how often and when? And then you say, Leslie, I need the facts on these. I know we've discussed before, but I haven't got the answer front of mind. Too many facts to hold in my head, but this is an important one. I want to be sure I do have it. And then Mark, to phrase the facts into answers, plus a line to take the conversation back up a level, i.e. to one of our narrative boxes or rocks. But why did you consider the issue of remote access to be an important issue at that time?
It was, as I said earlier, it was an ongoing question. It was something that was raised by postmasters in the cases that were being looked at. It was a question that Mr. Rudkin had raised. I may well have been reminded that Second Sight were going to ask about it, or would have been asked about it. It was an important matter to know about and to be able to answer honestly and truthfully to the Select Committee.
Hadn't Mr. Rudkin's allegations been put to bed by the Post Office?
I thought they had, yes.
He was
yes.
either lying or mistaken, according to the Post Office. He either hadn't been to the building, or if he had, he'd got it all wrong when he went there.
I think the Post Office had explained to him that there was a test rig in the basement and that it wouldn't have been possible to access the system at that stage.
But you thought this was an obvious question you were going to be asked?
Yes.
And going back to the previous page, please, at the foot of the page. You say, what's the true answer? I hope it is that we know that this is not possible and we're able to explain why that is. I need to say, no, it's not possible. Why did you need to say publicly to evidence to a Select Committee that remote access was not possible?
I expected that this might be a question, as you explained before, that would come up, and my understanding was that it was not possible, and so I wanted to be able to say that, but what I also wanted to be able to do was to explain why I knew that was the case, which is why I go on to say, and that's because of XXX.
But why did you need to say no, it's not possible?
I phrased this point very specifically, and I can remember why I did this. Alice Perkins, not related to this particularly, but I can remember Alice Perkins saying to me at some stage, Paula, if you want to get the truth and a really clear answer from somebody, you should tell them what it is you want to say very clearly, and then ask for the information that backs that up. That was why I phrased this that way.
That's an odd way of going about things, isn't it?
I beg your pardon?
That's an odd way of going about things, isn't it?
It
I
was
want
a
to know
piece
the
of
answer to the
advice.
question. Here's the answer to the question. Tell me I'm wrong.
Well, yes, I hope they would do. This was a very genuine attempt to be able to reassure the select. I believed this was absolutely the case. I had an obligation going before the select committee to be able to share the information that I knew and to be able to answer their questions correctly, and this is what I was trying to ask for from the team. I was not in any way, if you are, forgive me, if you're suggesting this, trying to tell them what the answer should be. It was
I thought you
worded,
said that's what Miss Perkins said you should do in trying to get information out of people.
Yes, but it was not done because I necessarily knew this was the answer. This was a...
I thought you said a moment ago that you believed it to be the answer.
I did believe it to be the answer, and so I wanted to be able to say to the Select Committee in complete truth and sincerity that it was not possible to remotely access a branch account without the sub-postmasters knowing, and I wanted to be able to explain why that was the case.
Wouldn't the honest and straightforward thing to have done would be to stop your reply to the question that you asked with the question mark after the word answer?
I wanted to be really... I'm very sorry. I am giving you completely the truthful answer on this. I remember why I phrased this way. Not because I was trying to tell people what the answer was at all, but because I was trying to get them to phrase something in a way that said, from my understanding, this is what it should be. I had been told over all of the time that it was not possible, and I wanted to be able to explain to the Select Committee that that was absolutely the case.
You refer to a briefing that you received, a briefing pack, and then an addendum to the briefing pack that you received. You refer to that in your witness statement for the Select Committee hearing. And you tell us in your witness statement, sorry, this can come down. You tell us in your witness statement that you have no memory of seeing the addendum to the briefing pack, which addresses remote access, at the time of the Select Committee, yes?
I simply don't recall. I don't know whether I did or I didn't.
Well, in your witness statement, you say you have no memory of seeing it. By that, do you mean I undoubtedly got it, but I just can't recall its contents?
Yes, I
now?
think so.
Right.
Yes, I think so.
Can we look at how you got it first? Poll 0011 7096. An email with now the day before the Select Committee hearing at 5:54 in the evening. So it's the 2nd of February 2015. An email from Jane Hill, the Head of Public Affairs, to you with an attachment addendum document and a scheme key facts document. It's only the first I'm interested in. And she says, "Dear Paula, please find attached 2 final briefing documents. 1, addendum to Friday's briefing pack. This includes our position on claims, suspense accounts, second site information, requests and remote access. I will bring hard copies with me to breakfast tomorrow. See you then. Just looking at the distribution list on that, given that the document is significantly about IT issues, do you know why Leslie Sewell isn't one of the people mentioned?
I don't. I assume that Leslie Sewell was involved in the process. But these are the... No, I don't know why Leslie's not copied, actually. I hadn't noticed that before.
You, is this right, wouldn't have known how the document itself had been created, i.e. what work had gone into it?
No, I do now, but I didn't at the time.
Let's look at that addendum, please. Poll 0011 7097. This is the attachment. If we can display pages 1 and 2 side by side. Looks like we can't display the whole of page 1. It's a 2-page document.
Yes.
Yes? So it's quite a short document, quite pithy. Yes?
Yes.
With, thank you, with bullet points, with headings, mediation stats, claims, suspense accounts, second site requests for information, and then remote tampering, as it's called. Yes?
Yes.
So if we just look at the briefing you were having for your appearance before Parliament on remote tampering. If we just look at that page 2 then, please. And blow up a bit, thank you very much. So this is essentially the answer to your email.
Yes.
And just looking at the way that it's arranged, would you agree that the first 4 bullet points set out what you're to say? If you're pushed, you can then say the next 3 things. And then if injection of new transactions into a branch account is raised, then you can say the next things, yes?
Yes.
So just looking at the scheme of the document, it contains a top line, essentially, of what you're to volunteer, then an account of what you're to say if you're pushed, and then what you're to say if you're really pushed. Is that right?
That is the way it appears, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
I don't suppose I would have taken it necessarily that way, but yeah.
Let's look at what you're allowed to say before you're pushed. The first 4 bullet points, transaction data in branch accounts can't be changed remotely. There's no evidence of malicious tampering. There is no functionality in Horizon for the Post Office or Fujitsu to edit, manipulate, or remove transaction data once it's been recorded in a branch's account. There's also no evidence at all of any malicious remote tampering. If pushed, stress again that there is no remote access that enables branch transaction data to be edited, changed, or manipulated. As you'd expect, support staff can review and monitor the system, part of the standard service contract, but as above, transaction data cannot be manipulated. As part of day-to-day business as usual process, Post Office can post correcting transactions to a branch account. These are transaction corrections and transaction acknowledgements visible to the postmaster, which enable accounts to be brought into balance. These have to be accepted by a user logged into the branch Horizon terminal before they're recorded in the branch accounts, so they're fully visible to the branch. And then if injection of new transaction into a branch account is raised, that's raised by the committee, there is functionality to add transactions. This is the balancing transaction process. and would only be used in the event of an error that can't be corrected by a TA or a TC, a transaction acknowledgement or transaction correction. It's good industry practice to have this functionality, but the use of the process is so rare, it would only take place after a full discussion with the postmaster involved. These will be visible and also have a unique identifier in the audit trail. It's only been used once since March 2010, Horizon Online Go Live. The overall system is tightly controlled via standard industry protocols, and it is assured independently in internal audits for ISO 27001, Ernst & Young for IAS 3402, and part of PCI audits. There are numerous tests and checks, including daily checks. You accept that this addendum was prepared for you and emailed to you? Yes?
Yes.
If we scroll up, please. It concerned an issue that you had expressly requested to be addressed in a briefing.
Yes.
And which you regarded as important.
Yes.
It's a very short document. Yes?
Yes.
Your public affairs director, Jane Hill, had said she was going to print the document and bring it for you to read on the morning of the select committee hearing at breakfast.
Yes.
In those circumstances, do you accept you're very likely to have read this addendum?
I'm sure. How much I read and how much I took in, I have no idea, because it was the inquiry scene, there was a lot more documentation than just this. But yes, I would have tried to prepare it as best as I could.
As we've discussed, the addendum includes a strategy to hold four lines, the first four, give certain information when pushed, and further information if pushed further. Did you agree with that strategy?
No, as I said, I'm not sure that I would necessarily have taken it this way. I didn't ask for that strategy. I don't suppose I even considered it on the morning of the select committee.
Why did you think you wouldn't consider it, having identified the topic as an important one, having asked specifically for a briefing about it, and having been given a briefing?
I meant I wouldn't have considered the strategy and the way this is set out in terms of 3 different ways of approaching it. And the reason I wouldn't have considered that is that I would respond to the questions as they were asked, and I would respond to the select committee openly and honestly with what I knew and could recall at the time under the pressure of the select committee. But I wouldn't have gone in. You can't do that. It's like sitting here today. You can't come into these sorts of very high pressure environments with a strategy as to how you're going to handle it.
Why would the Post Office adopt a strategy of withholding information in the first instance unless pushed, and in the second instance unless pushed or asked directly?
You would have to ask Jane Hill. I don't know that I've seen anything else.
Would that be an appropriate strategy?
No, I've simply said that I've just said that I would have I did approach the select committee with an intention to answer their questions as openly and honestly as I knew.
You say in your witness statement that this document would have reinforced your belief that it was not possible to change branch accounts without the sub-postmaster's consent. Yes?
Yes, if you say so, yes.
Yes. Where does it say in the document that it was not possible without the sub-postmaster's consent?
The thing that I remember very clearly from this was, is the point about the function. There is no functionality in Horizon. Was a very reassuring line to have read. The point that it made further down about the balancing transaction process would have reminded me what I knew from 2014, from the conversation with Leslie from the Deloitte report.
But if we just go to the top of the page, please. Bullet point 3, there is no functionality. And if we scroll down. if injection of new transaction is raised, first bullet point, there is functionality. I mean, what this is doing is it's saying come out with the clear, easy, straight denial first. Say there's no functionality. But then the more nuanced answer is only if they really push you on it. Is that the way the Post Office operates?
I agree, that's what it's saying. No, that certainly is not the way that I operate or operated at the Select Committee in 2015. My retention of the branch accounts can't be changed remotely, and there's no functionality in Horizon. Are statements that stayed with me. And given this at very short notice, either overnight or that morning, I wouldn't have had time to take account of some sophisticated strategy about how the message was going to be managed. And I wouldn't do that. Whatever anybody asked me to do, I would only tell the truth.
Thank you. That can come down. Now, because of rules concerning parliamentary privilege, I'm not permitted to ask you questions the effect of which would be to impeach or to question the evidence that you gave to Parliament on the 3rd of February 2015. You understand?
I do, yes.
We've asked you in a witness statement to tell us what your state of mind was immediately before you gave evidence to the committee. You know that?
Yes.
Asking questions on the basis of the evidence that you subsequently gave to the committee.
Yes.
Can we look, please, at WITN 0102 0200? So, second witness statement. And can we look at page 9, please? Question 27. Or paragraph 27. Thank you. And just by way of context, we ask you to set out what your state of mind was, what your belief was, at 10 o'clock on the morning of the 3rd of February.
Yes.
And the issue we asked you to address was, quote, there was no functionality in Horizon for either branches, Post Office or Fujitsu to edit, manipulate or remove transaction data once it had been recorded in branches' accounts. And you say, at 10 a.m. on the 3rd of February 2015, I believed it to be true that there was no functionality in Horizon for either branches, Post Office or Fujitsu to edit, manipulate or remove transaction data once it had been recorded in a branch's account. My belief was based on the material provided to me in advance of the Select Committee set out above, and that includes the addendum document that we've just looked at.
Right.
How could you believe that there was no functionality to remove transaction data once it had been recorded in the branch's accounts in the light of the addendum briefing that you received, which said that balancing transactions could be undertaken, which involved editing, manipulating or removing transaction data once they had been recorded in a branch's accounts?
Because the information that I was given states exactly that, I think, that there was no functionality.
Well, the top line does. The
Yes.
first bullet point, the if you're not pushed on this issue, does.
Yes.
But the bottom line says that it can be done through balancing transactions. How could you only state the former, only believe the former to be true, when you knew that balancing transactions allowed precisely that to be done by Fujitsu?
I knew that one balancing transaction, and I didn't understand the technicality behind it, which as I explained earlier, I understood it as to be similar to a transaction correction, and did need a sub-postmaster's permission and had been sought. So
Ms Vennells, that's a different issue, whether in fact, on the occasion that it had been used, the permission of the sub-postmaster had been sought. This is whether the facility is there. And on the basis of the briefing that you were provided, the if pushed twice at the bottom of the page revealed to you that the facility was there.
Then at the time, I didn't register that. This was my understanding, that it was not possible to access a branch's account remotely without the sub-postmaster being aware of it. And that was based on my understanding of what was explained to me in 2014. I accept what you say, is that there is more information in that brief further down. But
Ms Vennells, it goes further than that, doesn't it? We've seen that in 2011, you were told by Ernst & Young that unrestricted access to privilege IT functions increases the risks of unauthorised and inappropriate access, which might lead to the processing of unauthorised transactions. We've seen that in 2014, you had the Deloitte board summary, which says that sub-postmaster approval is required except for balancing transaction postings. And you'd received the addendum document that in those final bullet points makes that point again. How could you have believed that there was no facility for Fujitsu to edit, manipulate or remove transaction data?
Because I imagine in the timescale that I'm looking at, as I explained in 2011, I looked for a briefing document to try and help me understand the wider issue around the technology audit, which I had never encountered before. In 2014, I was completely reassured by the CIO, who was the expert on this. I had no idea at any time that a balancing transaction could have been used in the multiple ways that it was. So by the time I get to the select committee and I get a brief on the morning or overnight, and I'd been away the night before, I did not reach a conclusion that meant that I was giving inaccurate information to the select committee. That is not something that I would have done.
Lastly on this topic, before we break for the evening, can we look please at poll 304-1258. This is after Parliament, and it's after the letter of claim has been received from Freeths, and it's a discussion about the content of the letter of response. And if we look at the foot of the page, there's an email from Jane McLeod, then General Counsel, to you. She says, as you'll recall, Post Office is committed to responding to the letter of claim received from Freeths by this Friday. In the second paragraph, none of the underlying arguments set out by Freeths are new. However, as a result of the work undertaken by Deloitte in relation to Horizon, we will be flagging that within Fujitsu there are a number of individuals who have super user rights, which can only be used in very limited and controlled circumstances. We do not believe this causes us any concerns from a legal perspective. However, it is a different positioning to the public statements that we have previously made, and therefore we should be prepared for adverse comments from the usual commentators. And then if we scroll up, it's on the page, you say, thanks Jane, this is clear, my only query is, I think that's
yes.
Fujitsu super users. What did we say previously? Answer, we haven't previously addressed super users, and the phrasing of some previous statements as to who can access and edit branch data is quite narrow. we're collating previous statements made as well as referencing what we've been provided by Fujitsu historically, so we can assess the extent of the communications gap. However, it's clear this is an area where we could face adverse media commentary. Did you understand at this point that the issue was about different positioning that the Post Office was taking in relation to previous statements?
Yes, I think that's right.
Was that because the existence of super users was already known to you?
I'm sorry, just ask the other question again.
Yes.
I'm not sure I picked the link up.
This was about Post Office's positioning?
Yes, this was about information Post Office was putting into the response to the letter of claim, I think. Is that right?
Yes, and you say, my only query is re-super users. What did we say previously?
Yes.
What you don't say is, what are super users? I've never heard of super users before.
Right, I'm not sure.
Were you aware of so-called super users before this, July 16?
I don't think so. I'm assuming that the reason I asked this question was that I wasn't. There was the Ernst & Young audit, which talked about privilege access. And I think I'm asking here as to what super users are, whether I can't remember whether I had that in mind or not. There was certainly privileged access that had come up in the Ernst & Young reports. I think AppSup was something that was referred to.
Ms. MacLeod says at the top of the page, we haven't addressed ... the phrasing of some of the previous statements as to who can access and edit branch data is quite narrow. Did you understand that to be a reference to the evidence that you had given to Parliament?
I don't think I made any connection to what I'd given to Parliament.
What statements had the Post Office made previously, publicly, as to who could and could not edit branch data?
The Post Office. Well, I don't know what it had done, stated previously. Presumably, there was a piece of work being produced to look at that. I can't remember now, and I clearly didn't know at the time what the Post Office had said.
But the short point is you didn't read this as a reference back to what you had said to Parliament?
No.
Thank you. So those are all my questions for today. It's just gone 4:30.
Yeah, just before we break, can I just go back to that additional briefing document that you got the day before or during the morning of, excuse me, the Select Committee hearing? And Mr. Beer asked you questions on the basis of it was laying out a strategy for you, all right? And you had that debate.
Yes.
If I were to suggest to you that you were being advised to be very precise, very circumspect, and very guarded about what you said, that was the effect of that document, would you agree?
I would, Sir Wynne. I'm not sure I would have noticed that on the morning of the day.
But you'll see the point in a moment. That was the effect that was trying to be created by those who created that document.
It could have been, yes.
Right.
Yes.
Why?
with hindsight, because possibly...
And if you need time to think about it,
No,
you
I
can tell
don't-
me in the
no,
morning.
No, I
It's all
don't,
right.
I don't...
No, that's enough now. It's a question that I have to pose for myself. So I'd like your help with the answer.
Yes, I understand the question. At the time, I didn't answer the question. I didn't ask the question. It didn't cross my mind at all. And this may be back to the point I made at the beginning of the day, that I could be too trusting of people. I took the information that I was given and went into a select committee. Why might they have set it out that way? With what I know now, it is... But I find it very difficult, because I knew that the people who were producing that document. But from what I know now, maybe other people knew more than I did, and they were trying to direct me to answer in a certain way.
All right. So I think we'll adjourn at that point, Mr. Beer, till tomorrow morning. Is it 9:45?
Yes, please, sir.
Can I say to the members of the public and the core participants who were present that it would have been possible for there to have been a lot more verbal intervention than there has been from the floor, and I'm very grateful to you for your restrained behaviour during the course of the day. But that's not to encourage you to be less restrained. That is to encourage you to be, if anything, even more restrained during the remainder of this week. So thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.